Uh, Good evening, everyone. We're going to get started. Welcome to the Cooper Union, and welcome to the second Making Home with lecture. This lecture series is a collaboration between two Coopers, and I'm going to explain what that means between two institutions, the Cooper Union and the Cooper Hewitt. And my name is Benjamin Aranda. I'm part of the faculty here at the Cooper Union, and I also fortunately I'm part of the design triennial at the Cooper Hewitt. And standing next to me is Alexandra Hepkowski, curator of public programs at the Cooper Hewitt. And Alexandra will introduce in a second the Making Home with lecture series that this is a part of. First, I just wanted to give you a little context for this evening. So the Cooper Union was founded in 1859 by Peter Cooper. He was an American industrialist, and it was really based on the belief that education be free to all and to anyone who qualifies, regardless of class, creed, race, or gender. And in line with this progressive mission, he also set up spaces for free expression and civil discourse, and this is really what we're continuing tonight, this evening. The Cooper Union and the Cooper Hewitt have a shared beginning, and you might not know this, but the Cooper Hewitt was founded in 1897 by Sarah and Eleanor Hewitt. They're the granddaughters of Peter Cooper. And the name, actually, of the Cooper Hewitt was originally the Cooper Union Museum for the Arts of Decoration. And it was located here across the street, actually, on the fourth floor. And the idea was that it was a free and accessible museum, a quote unquote practical working laboratory for use by students and designers and the general public. So eventually they moved uptown in 1969 to the Carnegie Mansion, where they're at now, and they changed their name to the Cooper Hewitt Museum of Decorative Arts and Design, part of the Smithsonian Institution. But I do want to say that this is really a kind of coming together of a shared history. And with that, I will pass it over to my colleague, Alexandra.
Thanks, Ben, and cheers to the Coopers. As Ben mentioned, this is a series, and this Making Home with Justice lecture is the second of 4 lectures in the series. They're all free and feature the Making Home Smithsonian Design Triennial exhibition participants, paired with designers, artists, professionals, and Cooper Union faculty or alumni, discussing the exhibition's exploration of home and its relation to data, justice, history, and building. One of our hopes with the triennial was to really activate the city, not just on site on our campus, but to talk about home in various places in New York City and beyond. We actually have one in DC later on in here. And so that brings us. If you haven't seen the exhibition yet, I encourage you to come on up. We're located on 91st and 5th Avenue. In the show, we have 25 site-specific installations taking over the whole museum, exploring design's role in shaping the physical and emotional realities of film across the United States, U.S. territories, and tribal nations. If you'd like to follow along and join other upcoming programming, head to the museum's website. The Cooper Union website also has the lectures here, and we also have a newsletter. Consider signing up. We'd like to extend a big thank you to everyone here at the Union, including Ben, who mentioned he's also part of the exhibition as an installation on the 3rd floor, and Haley Eber, the acting dean here at the Cooper Union School of Architecture, and Mauricio Higuera, who is the programs and new projects director. Okay, so at that, I'm gonna, sorry if you couldn't hear me before. I'm gonna hand it over to Deanna Van Buren, architect and founder of Designing Justice, Designing Spaces, who will discuss the ecosystems of care required to end mass incarceration, including the installation architecture of reentry in the exhibition. She'll open up then the conversation with Aaron Arnold, who is the Chief Development Officer at All Rise, a national nonprofit that works to improve the justice system responses to substance use and mental health disorders. Sethu Lakshmi Nair, a mediator, facilitator, coach, and trainer in the fields of alternative dispute resolution and restorative practices. And Guillermo Ruiz de Teresa, a professor here at Cooper Union and deputy director and curator at Storefront for Art and Architecture, who will be moderating the conversation. Please join us in giving them a warm welcome.
Yeah, I want to hold it. Hi, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You're going to have to forgive me. I am recovering from being sick, and my heart is breaking with all the things that are going on right now, just to be honest. That said, I'm really, really happy to be here with all of you, and it really meant a lot to get on a plane because this conversation is important. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to frame the problem. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the problem. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple solutions that we're looking at. And then we're going to do an exercise because nobody wants to see a bunch of people talk forever. And you're going to participate in that. And then we'll all talk together. Does that sound okay? All right. Sorry, we have to start here. Right. We got to start with the problem. So, I love this quote by my fangirl, Dr. Ruha Benjamin, where she says, we're living inside of somebody else's imagination, right? When I first heard that, right, it kind of resonated with me. It's like, I didn't come up with this. And it's important for this conversation with this particular community because last I checked, I thought that architects and designers were actually supposed to be taking the values and the beliefs and the dreams and the desires of our communities and manifesting those in built form, right? Rather than doing what the elite needs, right? What are the dreams and desires of the elite and the wealthy and the powerful and the institutional? So let's bookmark that because it's going to be important later. And we also have to know that we don't think at Designing Justice, Designing Spaces, we don't look at mass incarceration as a solo system, right? It's tied to other systems. It's inextricably linked to homelessness, to our education system, to our behavioral health system, right? To our foster care system. And it also includes crimmigration, which we're now facing, right? So the problem that we're posing is about to get worse. And they're all inextricably linked. So if we want to end mass incarceration, we really have to go address its root causes. And it's a whole lot of things, right? Everyone asks me like, oh, you're making better prisons, you're making better this, better that. No, no, no. There's a lot we have to build, right? And this is where we've been investing our money, right? This is the architecture of justice in this country, which I think manifests the beliefs and the values and the desires and the dreams of some people, right? But as we pay for this, right, this is years, hundreds of years of racist planning policy and a lack of resources in the communities most impacted look like this, right? So this is a whole ecosystem of punishment that is actually happening. And so as an architect, I started to ask myself, what are we doing? How are we doing it? And who are we doing it for? Right? Those are real questions for me. And most of you know I have found great inspiration in restorative justice and transformative justice. And I'm going to explain what it is, even if you know it, because this has been one of the most co-opted words in our profession and across other professions, right? What restorative justice actually is a philosophy, a set of practices that say, when someone has been harmed, when a harm has been committed, it is a breach of relationship, and the needs of the person or people who've been harmed must be addressed. That those who have committed that harm, right, we'll call these harmed parties for our conversation today, and responsible parties. The responsible parties are accountable and have an obligation to make amends. And what you're looking at are various practices all around the world and places, right? They're also spaces for this process of repair, even in cases of mass social conflict. So you don't tell me you can't do it in cases of violence. It's been done and it's being done, right? So I get inspired every day. And when we talk about transformative justice, now you must include systems of oppression as part of that conversation, right? So you also have to talk about racism. You have to talk about power, because that is also part of it. And so then the how and the who. So I believe that everybody's dreams and desires and beliefs should be manifested in built form, and that we need to learn how to work with everybody to ignite their imaginations. And I think that we are well poised to do that as artists, architects, designers. This should be part of our actual job, right? And I spent years and years going in and outside of institutions, working in communities of care, working with government officials, using every kind of creative tool I could get my hands on. And I'll tell you, not a single one of them asked for more prisons and jails and felt like that was going to be solving the problem. Not one person, right? Research has shown us, prototyping projects and building projects has shown us in my organization, and just talking to real world people, that this is the infrastructure we need to build, right? We need to build an ecosystem of care. And yes, I've created 8 points and 8 buckets because people like to think about things that way. But often projects can be all 8 of these things or some of these things. They're pretty basic things, like specialized housing and specialized spaces for education. And I don't have time to talk about all the buckets today, but I want to kind of focus on 2 types of things. And I'm not going to show fancy gymnastics of architecture, you guys. Like, these are subtle, slow, quiet projects that are intended to change people's minds and hearts and ways of thinking and development of prototypes. And one is going to be about reentry housing, as I hope you'll go up and see the exhibit at the Cooper Hewitt Museum, right? Talking about that piece of this ecosystem of care. And one that's very timely in New York City. And then a second set of ideas and projects around restorative justice, also very timely in New York City. So we'll start with the housing piece. So it seems kind of obvious, right? When I come home, I need housing. But what we find is that the reality is that those who have a record it's still okay. They are, I believe, the only group of people in this country that's still okay to discriminate against when it comes to housing. They are not the only unprotected class. So what happens? They become homeless often, right? So in the Bay Area, we have a huge homelessness issue. 20% of those people have had contact with the criminal justice system. We are changing policy, and there's no housing for them for a lot of reasons. The discrimination piece, not in my backyard piece, people don't have credit, right? They can't get a job, right? It's hard to get housing, yet housing is fundamental to the success of their reentry, right? So it doesn't make any logical sense. HUD is now starting to release some money for transitional supportive housing. But the problem is the folks waiting there for that are often private industries who also love reentry too, because they can make money off that as well. Right. So one of the things that we started to look at in my office for many years is all the kinds of reentry housing that is needed, not just what it needs to look like, but how you need to operate it and how you're going to pay for it. Right. The financing of this is really, really one of the major issues. I was talking to architects like, oh, how do you design it? I'm like, honey, you can design it. We just can't find out how we're going to pay for it. Right. That's the problem. And transitional supportive housing is one type of housing that is mandated for people coming out. So they have to go into this. Who wants to live in this? This is as bad as where you came from, right? So some of the solutions that we're looking at, right? So I'm grateful and happy to say, finally, we have hundreds of units of reentry housing on the boards right now, right? At various levels of every kind you can imagine, for women returning home, for young people as alternatives to incarceration. All of it, most of it, is awaiting construction and development due to money, right? It's all possible. We have the operator. What we've learned is the best reentry housing is operated by formerly incarcerated people. I don't participate in the design and development of any reentry housing not operated by formerly incarcerated men and women. That's just a fact. And I've seen tons of it. So I can tell you it works. It's dignified. Right. So all the projects we have in my office are all that kind. And I don't even put locations on them because that's how upset people get when they hear that you're going to have people in their backyard. Yet there's really no link between systems impact to people coming home and any kind of crime in their community. But the point is, it's happening. Right. It's happening and it's possible. And so this piece, right, that you see at the Cooper Hewitt Museum came out of looking at the money, right? Looking at the need for housing, looking at the fact that ground up construction is expensive. We need to repurpose existing infrastructure for this. looking at that last photo, that photo you saw with all the bunk beds, right? That's how people were living. And we started to work with formerly incarcerated men and women who had been living in that, like, look, we need some dignity and privacy in this situation. And we need to also figure out how to pay for it. So we figured, could we start to create a room that would provide that for you at a fraction of the cost of stick-built construction? And we held workshops with these men and women at our local community college. We were able to take their ideas and began to build prototypes that they also were participating in the construction of. So we worked with the Fab Lab at Laney College. So they were not only part of our design team, but they were also getting living wage jobs in digital fabrication at Laney College, right? So it was a workforce development opportunity. So we tried to stack the functions as we started to do that, so that we could then put these into for the same price. So you didn't need the bunk beds, but if we can make this work, right, we could get 50 men within an adaptive reuse facility at the same price point with a higher level of dignity. And it worked. We were able to get 2 of these in the field, and people were living in them. And we were like, okay, what is our next step? Well, apparently you have to, it's a little harder than I thought to make furniture. I thought it'd be so easy, right? I'm an architect, I make buildings, but it's not. So it took some time, right? We had to work with the Autodesk Foundation. We had to figure out how to make it lighter, right? How to get the cost down, how to get all of those things. So what we have now is an actual model that is light enough for 2 people to assemble in about 2.5 hours, right? So it's quick, right? So we get our labor costs down. It's all being digitally fabricated. And the idea is we're now also going to hopefully be working to get this into a workforce development program so that more systems impacted people can come out and that they're actually being made by them as well. Right. So I cannot tell you how grateful we are to get a patent. That's another thing. It's hard to get a patent, y'all. We got the design patent. We just got this functional patent last year, like right before the exhibit came open. I was like, thank God for free lawyers. So, and part of this patent is we don't want Geo Group to come take our stuff and replicate the thing, right? So hopefully what we'll be able to do is be like, if you want a trauma-informed actual design, you need to have DJDS do it, right? We have to approve it. We need to know because it's a certain way it has to go in. You can't just stick it in there. And so the magic of this opportunity at the Cooper Hewitt Museum was literally to create a showroom for the product. Right, so we can see 2 in place along with the interstitial spaces that are required along with it. What this also means is I'm able to bring in municipal leaders at the city level into the exhibit, which I'll be doing on Thursday and have been doing, so that they can begin to advocate for this, right? So it's like a cultural institution becomes showroom, right? It makes a lot of sense. People can come in, they can look it, they can touch it, they can feel it, they can taste it. And we can begin to move the needle on what this looks like for transitional supportive housing. And the timing couldn't be better because shortly after the opening, you all passed the City of Yes. Thank you for doing that. We have all these empty commercial office buildings. We got them in San Francisco. They're everywhere. They're perfect for this model, for this unit. And so our hope is that we can pilot this here in New York. Like we want to get 8 to 12 of these in place, see how it's working, right? Work out the kinks so that we can start to take this to scale. It can, of course, be used for other things because, I would live in one of these. They're nice, man. Like, I don't make stuff I wouldn't live in. I mean, really? Come on. They're great. They're great. And it's also great for supportive housing. Y'all said it yourselves, right? So this is the opportunity we have on our doorstep here, right? So sometimes just a small thing can begin to have a much wider impact. So I'm going to transition now to another kind of home, different home. I'm grateful for you all letting me talk about this piece of the work. And I'm going to just talk about a few different types of peacemaking and restorative justice pieces of infrastructure we're doing, because it's also very relevant to what's happening in New York right now. And this is an old project, y'all, super old. The Near West Side Peacemaking Project. My colleague Aaron's here, who is with me on this from the Center of Court Innovation. It was in the Near West Side neighborhood in Syracuse, New York. And I think I harassed Aaron quite a bit before he agreed to do this with me, didn't I? Yeah, I did. And you know, he finally called me one day. He's like, you know what, Deanna, I do think place matters. I do think we should do something. And we applied for a burn justice innovation grant. And I bring that up because that is under threat. And we may be talking a bit about that after the executive order that came out last night, right? Halting all federal funding grants. So this was an innovation grant that actually allowed us to bring Native American peacemaking practices into a non-Native community for the first time in the United States. Right? This was a very low-income neighborhood, but a really rich in diversity. Beautiful, beautiful community. And this is what Aaron was doing. You'll meet him later. I wasn't doing this, right? So this is what I love to talk, because this was my first experiment. I was experimenting throughout this time, right? Programs are designed all the time, you guys, right? And programs are direct service programs, not architectural programs. People are designing this stuff all the time. And then they'll come to you later, like after they figured it all out. But what was interesting about this was we're doing them in tandem. So they were working with the prosecutor, the DA to find quality of life crimes, right? You took my purse, et cetera, to go into a peacemaking process where elders in the community would deal with the issue, right? And they were being trained, working with the Navajo Nation, right, to do that. So this is diversion, right? Nobody's going to court. You're out, right? Love that. We don't even go in that little thing. And so they were doing that. I got trained as a circle keeper myself, right? Circle keeper light. And I developed something called the peacemaking palette. And I started to run circles in the community around what does a peacemaking center even look like? Like, I had no idea. I'd never been to one. We never made one before. And so the community also didn't know what peacemaking was. So they needed to see what that was. We did role play. I was able to sort of get a sense of what kind of spaces you need, what it needs to look and feel like, et cetera. I was able to code and analyze visual data and stories to figure out what that would be. And these were the basic things that people said they would need in a space for peacemaking. And I see some of the things over and over and over again, right? I like to work this way. And two things I'm just going to elevate: domestic scale, right? So very simple, small scaled infrastructure. And activated lobby, which I love this idea because it actually ties into somatic therapy, somatic experiencing, right? The need to move into space and be able to see yourself in it, to have your eye rest on things, to be able to regulate your nervous system. Design is powerful for being able to help people to regulate their nervous systems, as I started to see. So these are just some of those things. The other thing was like, where does it go? Because just because you build it doesn't mean they'll come. They will not. And so we had to find neutral territory. It took a long time to find the right place, right? The place where everyone felt they could come to, right? Neither party could own it. It also can't be downtown. I mean, this is not far from where the Justice Core is. It's too far. It's too far for people to go. Right? It needs to be, this kind of justice is hyper local. And so after some time, we were able to find a home that used to be a drug house in the community that was partially renovated by the university. We're able to get our hands on it. It's a different story. I'll tell a little bit about my awakening about the role of design and real estate development. So this was the inspiration for designing justice, designing spaces. But we were to take this and turn this into the Syracuse Peacemaking Center. And it's been up for a while. It's been going for quite a while now, which is why I love to look at it, because we leave our projects, but you should always go back and see what's happening, because it was just a home, right? People came in, it had all the things they asked for in it: a kitchen, place to break bread, a soft seating living room, a place to look out at a garden, views it could open up. Right? People came in, and what we were starting to hear is people were coming into the space and choosing to do peacemaking. Like, oh, I'll do this because of what it looks like, not because what you told me it was, right? The space was communicating a different set of values and a different process that made people feel safe. The other things that started to happen were a little bit unexpected, right? In that people started to have their quinceañeras here. People started to have their engagement party here. The school across the street started to send over the toughest cases. Rather than expelling the students, they were sending them over here. Kids were coming by all the time, right? This place became packed. And what was happening, right, is that the space was actually facilitating social cohesion in the community. And social cohesion is what actually keeps us safe, right? It's just this small, small project, right? So these are the kinds of ways to develop small new models, right, for replication. And so after that, I went back to Oakland. I was a little bit like, yeah, this works. I was like, maybe Oakland could be the country's first restorative justice city, right? Making restorative justice the primary way of addressing harm in our communities. And I got the police in the room. I got county agents in the room. I got people from the city in the room. I got some of the country's best restorative justice practitioners in the country. Sujata Baliga, she just won a MacArthur Genius Fellowship. She was in the room, y'all. And we sat there and they came up with this idea about a whole distributed network of restorative justice and peacemaking spaces like what you just saw, tied to schools and various existing institutions. So they came up with that without any of this ever having been known, right? And I say this because you can convene people to have conversations and you have no idea what is possible. You planted the seed. We created a space to ignite radical imagination. And then something happened, right? We were where that circle was became one of my first projects with DJDS, the country's first Center for Restorative Justice and Restorative Economics, that came out of a conversation. And this project was more things, right? So the vision was expanding, and I started both a real estate development and design company, right? Because I wasn't going to be in a situation where we didn't know how the money was going to happen. So we were helped, the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights, Causa Justa Just Cause, and other groups to find this building, purchase this building, right? So we negotiated the purchase and sale on it. We were able to help them get a nice long due diligence period during which we did a lot of design work. We gutted this building. We had to seismically retrofit the building, but the location was perfect for what they needed. And what it was a space for low-wage restaurant workers to get living wage jobs in fine dining, right? So it has the country's largest fine dining training kitchen in it. What it's doing now is also incubating small food businesses. So they're able to sort of use food entrepreneurship to bring economic wealth to the community, right? It also has community organizing space that they own, right? Because you have to understand, nonprofits just get pushed around. And you can't build if you don't own real estate, right? You can't do anything. You gotta have it. Thank you. Thanks, Alan. And then we also took the basement, right? You also need space that is incognito. I ain't playing, y'all. You gotta it's like old school, right? And anybody in the community can use this space. And you're starting to see things and patterns of the way that we think about environments. Culturally responsive art that you see yourself in, right? Flexible open space that people need. But what we also did was we were able to get the county's first dedicated space for peacemaking and restorative justice. That is all that happens here. And I say that because while the Syracuse Peacemaking Center had a lot of things happening in it, the fact that this is all that happens here is turning out to be a very powerful move, right? Sacred in the way that you would go to any spiritual space, right? Well, you know what happens in that space. You go to a courthouse, you know what happens in there. You can feel it. You can feel the energy of it. You know how to act in it. What we found after doing a post-occupancy evaluation, using a whole range of research methodologies, were a lot of things, right? So we found out a lot of cool stuff, but I will just focus on that space of many things was changing the way that people behaved. It was changing the way people resolved conflict, right? So now, instead of doing what they used to do, right, going into some kind of, I think Setu will talk a little bit more about what happens in the workplace, right? In this sort of interpersonal conflict, they now come into the peace room. This peace room also hosts formerly incarcerated grief circles, all kinds of things happening. It's a powerful space. People feel different in it. They're acting different in it. So dedicated space for restorative justice and peacemaking, we are beginning to prove has impact on behavior change and culture change, right? Which is how, so you take these small projects, you start to do the research, and you start to push the needle because people seem to believe data and science and stuff. So what we started to do was actually running our research methods through the institutional review board. So it's publishable, documentable research. These are some of our methods that we use, not all of them, right? We code and analyze it pretty rigorously. And it's allowing us to begin to manifest our theory of change at Designing Justice Designing Spaces, right? It's not enough to build a whole bunch of stuff. We have to evaluate the things, make sure it works, prove that it works, and then we share it with everybody, right? All the things, so that you can do it too, and that people start to pay for it and sponsor it. And so I'm going to start to close on this piece, the Spaces for Survivors work. This is work that came out of a repeat client with the Center for Court Innovation, which we did with the Syracuse Peacemaking Project. And in the Spaces for Survivors work was really around spaces in cases of severe violence, right? They're not quality of life crimes. And I just want to be clear, when we say spaces for survivors, we mean people who have survived harm. And what we know is most people who are inside of our institutions have suffered extreme harm, right? I mean, when I worked inside, I was working inside the jail with a lot of incarcerated women. It was the county jail, like 60 women, and 100% of them were survivors of sexual violence, 100%, guaranteed. So hurt people, they need healing. And so we look at this as both sides, right? All sides. Most people have been on both sides of this. And so this is some of the projects in our portfolio around our Spaces for Survivors work. Community Works has recently completed construction. Candace House is in Canada, so we also look at projects we didn't design and do. So we're starting to build up the case for this work. The procedural justice piece, we do a Center for Court Innovation. You can see on our website, that's actually a toolkit in cases of people who have been survivors of homicide. But Common Justice is right here in Brooklyn, and it's under construction now. So I'll show some bits, right? But come back in March and you'll see it. Now, this is, I'm looking at this and, you know, it is the first alternative to incarceration and victim service program that focuses on violent felonies in the adult courts, right? So I've been harassing these people forever because I want to be able to develop environments for this stuff, because this is the stuff everyone's like, well, how can you use it for this? I'm like, you can. It's happening. I'm concerned about their funding after what we just saw, what we're seeing. So, you know, I'm going to be amplifying on how we begin to support these kinds of programs to proliferate and get paid for in a whole wide range of things. But we began doing this also during the pandemic, asking this question, you know, can these environments support us emotionally? We don't generally go into environment like, oh, is it gonna reduce carbon emissions? I'm not saying that's not important, but we care about how do people feel? Let's check on the feelings. And so we asked people how they felt. These are pictures of the spaces that they were operating out of, which is not uncommon for most nonprofit service spaces. They look like shit. They do. They're terrible. You wouldn't want to work in it. And you certainly want to meet someone that had attempted to murder you in those spaces. It's horrible. It's horrible. And this is how that makes people feel. All right. So this is the environment that this kind of justice is happening in. And here's how they want to feel, right? And you can feel it in your body when you look at it, right? That's how they want to feel. So how do we make spaces for justice that feel like this? And so when you're dealing with what we call harmed and responsible parties in this context, you have to be very careful about the spaces. You can't run into somebody. This happens, I've talked to a lot of people in the courthouse, right? I'm in the bathroom and I run into the person who's harmed me, right? So really tracking what spaces each of them need, what are the common spaces and where are those shared spaces, right? And these were the kinds of environments collectively, from staff to harmed and responsible parties and all the communities of care, the kinds of things that we found needed to be clear, right? Spatial diversity, designated and clear seating areas, right? Biophilia, which is not, you know, rocket science. You can imagine people would want that. Nourishment and hospitality, right? Simple things. But all these things matter within the design and layout of the project. Sound and acoustics is critical. Visual, privacy, but also transparency, always struggling with that. So there's a range of things that we know need to be present when we're beginning to develop these spaces. We were able to take every single space for the client, show them like, this is doing this, this is doing this, this is doing this. Because the other thing is you have to educate the folks on what is, like, this is a collective sharing of knowledge and information. their spaces look the way they are because architects don't serve them. They don't have any exposure to that. They can't afford one. Like, how does that work for them? So making it clear that we leave behind knowledge for them to know what these environments need to look like. And so the space is near J Street. And being clear about the circulation patterns for the responsible parties, for the harm parties, they will come in at a certain point, right, together. And they're going to have to, operationally, you're going to have to time it, right? So they don't come at the same time, but there's clarity. So the pieces that you see in color, water, air, fire, earth, are just simple ways that we can make sure that the environment is grounded in that. And those are the markers by which we can start to see and find our way throughout the project. Water is just flow, right? One thing we're like is like, you just have to allow a lot of space for movement and change over time. And so we're starting to, I had my team like shove all the boxes aside and like hide the tape. So like make it look like it's done. So it'll be done soon, right? But they've been able to sort of, it took me years to get them to buy in to that, the fact that this environment we value and the impact it's already having on them is palpable. One thing is people are coming to work. That helps. They're coming in. They're already coming in, sitting amidst the boxes, right? And so all of these pieces are there and they anchor and ground the space. They help you guide you as you move through the environment. And the rest of the spaces will be supporting it as you move throughout all of that. So when I come back, it'll be big opening and we can see it. But what's more exciting is, does it work, right? We had hope, National Endowment of the Arts funding, to begin to do the evaluation and test it out and see. Because if we can, our hope with this project is the way that they were taking people to Norway to look at the nice prisons, right? That then got people to think, oh, maybe we should support people. We can take them here and be like, oh no, we could use restorative justice in cases of severe violence, right? So what is the power of design and place? It doesn't have to be a huge thing. These small projects, these small steps, these small moments with a lot of care, time, and attention put into them, you can then leverage to make change. And so we call these activities for impact, right? So I have 3 verticals in my organization. We have architecture, we have real estate, and then we have activities for impact. That's strategic communications, the toolkits that we make, right? So that we can, like, you can do it, right? Everything's open source, design guidelines, all of that stuff matters, and research and evaluation, really, really important. And so we take our time, we're careful, we're slow, and I believe if we stay the course, we will win. So you guys are in a great place for this stuff. You got a lot of really cool things happening in New York and the state of New York. I'm on the New York State Prison Redevelopment Commission. I have never seen anything like that in the entire United States. Nobody else has common justice. Nobody's doing what Setu's going to talk about, the Center for Creative Conflict Resolution, where the whole city has to go into some type of city employees, sorry, except the police, I think. They always get out of it. They have to do that, right? So this is cutting edge stuff happening in your backyard. So you should know about it. You should support it, right? And so I leave you with this question. Can New York become the country's first restorative justice city? I'm mad at it. I'm mad at it. If you beat Oakland, that's fine, because I'm actually from here. So I still win either way. So I'm going to give this to Setu now because we're going to practice. You okay to practice a little bit? Let's try and see what this looks like and feels like. Great.
Wow. Can we get greater applause for Deanna? All right. I'll invite you to find a person next to you. Just connect with a person next to you. Turn to them. If you have to shift over, just get up and shift over. You can leave your belongings wherever they are. Yeah. Try it. See what happens. All right. Can we get the lights back on the people in the audience? Is that possible for just a few more minutes? Thank you. Thank you. Hi, Ray. There's our director, Ray. All right. Has everyone found a person to sit next to? And great. So one person is A, the other person is B. Figure that out. The invitation here is, it's so great. Automatically, we start talking to each other. I love it. The invitation here is to, at all costs, convince the person next to you to switch seats with you. Okay? Wait, hear me out a little bit more. Do anything short of physical violence is allowed in this room to convince the other person to switch sides with you. I'll give you about 3 to 4 minutes, then I'll get your attention back. Go. Hello, hello. Welcome back. Welcome back. All right, I saw some creativity in action here. If I if I could get a hand raise for anyone who thinks they were successful in their attempt. Higher, higher, higher. There you go. Great. To the people who were successful, and the people who are not successful, will you raise your hand? Great. Will you tell me what you tried?
I was offered the opportunity to switch.
Okay. Okay. Who was not successful? Great. Over there. Oh, 1 second. Okay. What did you try?
Well, interestingly, we started by agreeing that we're very easy to convince, and then we just couldn't convince each other.
So you had agreement and still were not able to convince each other. You, sir, here, what did you try?
I tried to convince my partner here that we were here to support the work that you were doing, and there was value in having a positive outcome for this. But
Strategy. Try to be strategic about the ask. Did it work? It didn't work. How about you? What did you try?
I actually just kept fighting with him, trying to get me to move. We never switched.
Yeah. So strategically trying to convince that it's about other people, not us, is one of the attempts you made. Anyone else who was not successful?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just got more involved in the conversation and left behind the idea of exchanging seats.
Just made the problem go away altogether by ignoring it. That's one way. And anyone else over there in the back? What about the people who were successful? Before you tell me your secret, what did you try? Anyone who was successful, what did you first try?
Look, went to the bathroom. He's not here. But I said to him, it's a very good seat. I've been sitting in it. It's warm. My jacket is here. It also has a table you can get up. You can't try it out? Yeah.
Great.
Minute and a half.
So you were bribing and it worked. False praise. false praise, and it worked. Anyone else who was successful and before you were, yeah, go ahead.
This was super interesting. So I leaned over to this lovely person and just said, I would like to invite you to switch seats with me. Would you like to do that? And she just received that and we switched.
Wonderful. That is, if you haven't figured it out yet, that was the trick, the answer. Oh, yes. Hi. We were wondering if you were successful in your attempt before you went to the bathroom. Okay. So why did you do that?
He was a great salesman. He convinced me that the seat was more comfortable.
Okay, great. Can I ask you, Ray, what you tried? Ray Kramer over there that I'm pointing to? Persuasion?
More comfortable, better view, get a different perspective on the stage and the audience.
And it worked?
I think it worked, right?
Great. What about over here? What was happening here?
I really sucked at this, yeah, which is, there you go. I'm an architect, but I tried to bribe you, active bribery, but you came up with a better idea, and you, I think, got us to win.
Well, I saw that the bribery wasn't working, so we had to come up with something else. And because I'm a lawyer and I can parse directions with the best of them, I said, well, we have to switch, but no one said anything about switching back or whatever happens after that. So I said, hey, listen, we just have to switch for a little while, then we can switch back, and then we can compare notes about which seat is better, and it'll be great for everybody. And he said, well, yeah, that sounds interesting, so fine.
Great. Thank you so much for participating. The invitation here in this exercise was just, I invite you to notice. What I noticed from up here is at first we all tried in different ways to convince the other. It could have been, sometimes it's bribery, sometimes it's a plain old threat, sometimes it's a credit card somebody pulls out. It's amazing what happens in these exercises. But eventually, one or two people started to switch seats. And then I noticed from here that other people noticed that happening. How many people noticed other people getting up and switching seats and then decided to try that? Amazing. Amazing. So the point of this exercise is only to notice, one, what happens when we're invited to pursue a goal. Immediately, we sort of go into this fight mode, that I win versus you. Like it's me against you, I win, you lose. And this is our tendency when we're put in any kind of conflict situation, when we are in a conflict. And this is just normal. We're primed in some ways. And in a way, just simply asking you to meet a goal and give each of you the same goal, but have each of you pit against each other. In doing that, I primed you a little bit for the conflict. But our tendency is to do that. Our tendency is to go us versus them, you versus me. And then you just take a little time, some conversation, and maybe some influence by witnessing other people do something differently. Then we start to imagine different possibilities of relating. And that's all that was this exercise is about. And thank you so much for participating. You can give yourselves a big round of applause. So this tendency in conflict is so normal. And we see this in our workplaces, in our homes, in our families. Conflict is real. It happens. And it's so relational, right? Like the moment that we're invited to think differently about it, we can imagine different possibilities. Hush. Should I pass it to you? Just keep talking. Yeah, I'll pass it to you to lead us in a conversation that maybe connects to some of this.
Thank you so much, Seitu. That was a lovely kind of embodiment of what we've been listening to during this conversation. And thank you all so much for joining us for this second part of today's evening. And so in preparation for today's discussion, and maybe as a result of like the jolt of the daily news, I was reading Byung-Chul Han's The Spirit of Hope. It's a short essay that responds to our current context, and it's centered on what does it mean to have hope in a time that seems devoid of it. He positions hope as the ability to imagine a different world, a future that escapes the logics of domination and exploitation, and hope not as a tool for reaching a specific goal, but as an openness to new possibilities, even in the midst of crisis. So hope not as optimism, not with a conviction that something will turn out well, but with a certainty that something makes sense, regardless of. So when looking at today's conversation on designing justice, designing spaces, but also the work of the Center for Justice Innovation, of All Rise, of the Center for Conflict Resolution, of Hidden Water, it was clear to me how hope in the Byung-Chul Han sense was at the center of all of your work, that bring forward an ability to try new things, even in conditions that seem hopeless. And just to begin or to kick us off, just because Aaron hasn't really had a chance to speak, I wanted to start with him. So you have real world experience now with All Rise and before as part of the Center for Justice Innovation, bringing to life many modes of community justice, alternatives to incarceration. And as kind of Deanna pointed out, you have a long-standing relationship with her, taking part in developing these projects from scratch. So I wonder if you could share from your perspective how important it is, both a space and place when dealing with justice. And what have you learned in the process of working alongside Deanna in this role?
Thanks, Guillermo. I just want to make it clear for the record that I was not advised what the question was going to be before we got here, so I now have to think fast. I mean, the first thing I'll say is I don't know the first thing about design. I'm an attorney. I'm a former prosecutor. I've spent my professional career working in and with the criminal justice system. It's been my great pleasure to meet Deanna and other folks like her and get involved in this work. But here's what I do know from working in the criminal justice system, that nobody wants to go to a courthouse or to a jail or anyone, not people who are involved in the justice system, not the people who work there. These are not, for the most part, nice spaces. I mean, you do find occasionally you go to a small town and they've got a big, gorgeous, stately courthouse that was built, in the early 1800s, and it's got charm. But by and large, they're very institutional spaces, like the ones Deanna was showing up on one of her early slides. They're spaces that are cold. They are scary for a lot of people. They're off-putting. They provoke anxiety. And that's, for the most part, that's what we're faced with in this country, is that when you have a problem, when you have a conflict, when you've been charged with a crime, these are the places where you go 99.9% of the time. So there are opportunities throughout our justice system, including with specially designed restorative justice spaces, but really in all kinds of spaces, to improve the look and feel of justice. And there are other projects that I've, worked around when I spent 15 years at the Center for Justice Innovation, that were all about improving regular courthouses and improving jails and stuff, in addition to kind of building new bespoke places from scratch that can do new things. So there is a need for thinking about design throughout the system, and very few people doing it.
Thanks. And maybe to go back to the experience we just had with you, Setu. So much of your work is about how to foster an environment where we are able to better listen to each other and to build strength in our relationships. And in a lot of the work that Deanna puts forward, we're talking about kind of reimagining what public institutions can be and what those adjacencies might look like. Institutions that are sensible, that kind of seep into the civic realm. So I was wondering if you could share if there are beacons of hope in New York City, as kind of Deanna started pointing to, that are putting in place more sensible approaches to justice that you can tell us about?
Absolutely. There are a lot more spaces and places than we actually might be aware of in New York City and Oakland and any place. And I really think, I'd like to start in this very micro relational space. Like that is the space where so much is possible. Because to me, in that relational place, every one of us has a longing to connect with another human being in some capacity or the other. And I think for me, that is a starting place, that longing for connection. How true that is for me, how true that is for you, how true it is in your marriages, in your workplace relationships, in your community spaces. just recognizing the truth in that and living into that, maybe designing around that, is where I would like to start. In New York City, there are plenty of community-based organizations, nonprofit organizations, but really only one city government entity called the Center for Creative Conflict Resolution that was founded about nearly 10 years ago. The founder of the organization is sitting in the back over there, Judge Raymond Kramer. He was a visionary, and he really imagined what possibilities there are to apply processes and relationally sensible processes like mediation or circles or one-on-one simple conversations to get to conflicts early in the process before they worsen. So we, the center, really are housed within city government. Our primary goal at the moment is to work with all city government agencies and mayoral offices. There are about 70 to 80 city government agencies. When I say agencies, I mean the Parks Department. We do work with the New York Police Department, Department of Corrections, city planning. These are all the different, environmental protection, just to name a few. These are the city government agencies. And these agencies are sort of hunkered down institutions that make the city run. The lights, the water, all of it, the streets, transportation. And then there are mayoral offices that are smaller offices that are usually run by the mayor in charge at that time. And they're usually around issues, specific issues like criminal justice or gender justice, different veterans affairs like that. So all of these entities together make the city run. Our task at the center is really to make sure that we can build the capacity for all of this work to be done in a way that is relationally sound, is the way that I would like to talk about it. So we do conflict resolution. It's like, everybody and anywhere there is any endeavor to work together, there's conflict, right? And so and typically we tend to sort of default to the kind of reactions we had when we were doing the exercise, like the bribe. This is very low stakes exercise that we did, the bribing, the convincing, the, maybe sometimes threatening. These are our tendencies. So our hope is really, and our work is to bring practices like circles and mediations into places so that people can have alternatives, other options to resolve conflict, essentially. How many people here know generally what I mean by mediation? Like, or generally understand what mediation is? Great. Mediation is just a process, really, but the value of it is that two people have the opportunity to sit down together with the help of a neutral third facilitator to help them really understand what's going on here in this situation. It's not a restorative circle exactly, but it is a very structured process that helps you resolve a conflict. And so we've been doing that work very slowly and very consistently within the agencies and offices so that people and leaders within these agencies that are then doing the public facing work can both engage with public in a sound, relationally intelligent way, but also start to think about how government public relations can be improved by responding well in the face of conflict. And so this is just one example, and I'll give you an example of that public government, an innovative little program that we developed to improve public government relations. And during the pandemic time, most people who had homes to live in were living at home. And in New York City, a home is usually, above a business, above a bar in Manhattan. So there were all of these complaints coming into 311, quality of life complaints, where bar owners and residents were fighting with each other about sleeping hours and sound and noise. And so we developed a program in partnership with one of the mayor's office, the Office of Nightlife, to respond to these 311 calls in a way that actually allows people to talk to one another. So we created a mediation program called MEND, Mediating Establishment and Neighbor Disputes. And it's simple, just having those two, voluntarily inviting those two people to come and have a conversation. And then we at the center would mediate that. And instead of that becoming more more potential violence or more litigation in the court system. So there's sort of like a rerouting of that conflict and responding to that in a good way. We continue to do this work. I'm taking a lot of time to talk. We continue to do this work in the Parks Department with city planning, really trying to take the intelligence of these processes and trying to see like where can we develop an innovative program with government and public.
And maybe tying it back to a comment that Deanna gave during her talk on the importance of federal funding. So you mentioned kind of the executive order that we just heard on freezing federal funding and how it might affect a lot of this work. But a lot of you were deep in this work in 2016 as well. Having said that, the ecosystem has evolved and strengthened. So I was wondering, how do you see, as we embark upon this current new, I guess, political cycle, how do you see unforeseen challenges, but also if you see opportunities amongst this evolving context?
I want to hear what they have to say first. Sorry.
I have some thoughts. I'm not sure you're gonna like what I'm gonna say, but I'm gonna say it anyway. So I do a lot of I live in Brooklyn, and I've been in the city for, in New York City for a decade. But I do a lot of my day-to-day work in what's often derisively called flyover country, and I'm on planes a lot. I'm in the Midwest, driving around little towns, and I see this work maybe slightly differently because of that experience. And one of the things that I think is potentially a barrier to a broader uptake of these kinds of practices and the availability of more funding and all that kind of stuff is I think sometimes folks who are deeply immersed in the restorative justice world become comfortable using language and explaining their program and their philosophy and their way of doing things in such a way that it causes a defensive reaction in folks who aren't already true believers. And so one of the things that I think that I have had success with in my career, and it speaks a lot to who I am. I'm a white guy. I'm a former prosecutor. I can move in spaces, pretty easily. But I've also been, I think, good at trying to translate the kinds of ideas that Deanna and Sethu have been articulating very, very well and make them understandable to folks who don't speak the same kind of language and use the same kind of vocabulary or even buy into the same kinds of ideas, right? I can't walk into a probation office, let's say, in Indiana or Wisconsin and roll in and talk about systemic oppression. They're going to be like, you're telling me that I'm oppressing people? Get the hell out of my office. You know what I mean? So you've got to be able to explain the concepts in a way that works for the recipient of the information. And then the good thing, in my opinion, is these ideas sell themselves if we don't defeat them with the messaging, right? Because at the end of the day, like when we did it in Syracuse, by the way, I don't know if anyone's been to Syracuse. It's in what's traditionally a conservative county. It's not known for its progressive leanings. But we went to the powers that be in that community who, I had worked with for many years and developed relationships with. And we said to them, we want to build a restorative justice center on the Near West Side, and we want you to send your cases. The police department, we want you to send your cases. The court system, we want you to send your cases. The school district, we want you to send your cases to us to help deal with rather than do them in your system. Well, why would they want to do that? Well, for one thing, it takes cases out of their system. They don't have to deal with them. Everyone likes to do less work. We'll take your cases. The people who elect you, the people who have a say in whether or not you're popular and keep your job, they like this better. If you talk to crime victims, if you talk to people who live in distressed communities, what do they want when things go wrong in their community? almost universally, they don't want more incarceration. They don't want stricter punishments. They want an apology. They want an opportunity to be heard and explain how things have harmed them and what would make them feel better. And so, anyway, I think you get my point. We need to be able to tailor this message for different audiences in a way that makes sense for them, because I think the ideas really are universal, and we risk politicizing them and thereby limiting their reach. And I think the same holds true on the funding side, right? Like, we have been very successful when I was at the Center for Justice Innovation and now at my current position. We're talking with funders all the time, and they listen to us, right? If we come to them with a good idea that is persuasive, they will oftentimes open the checkbook and say, "Oh, all right, fine, we'll let you give it a try." But again, it's all in kind of how you present it.
And I'll just add, I love what you said, as I think I've had a similar experience from 2016, actually maybe more so, and I hope it's not getting less, right? Where the Koch brothers called me, not the two dudes themselves, I think one's passed away, but like their foundation called because they love restorative justice. It's less government, right? You don't need all that infrastructure, don't need it. When I think I showed one of the images of in Fumble Talk in Sierra Leone, they just do it under a tree, right? So it's not actually, and what you just practice, right, would say to you, like, you could just do it. So they love it. And so I've had many conversations with folks who are far side of the value spectrum in some ways than I am, and we are able to agree because I think in some ways, I think it's like what you were saying, it's innate, right? We're just all human. This is a human way of addressing harm that honors some of our humanities. So I hope that whatever way and all the ways that we do this work can begin to get us to that place, because some conversing has to happen.
Yeah, in terms of New York City, we work in New York City government, and every 4 to 8 years we have a new mayor. So our center, innovative and nimble as it can be and attempts to be, is potentially under threat every 4 to 8 years when there's a new mayor who may not be interested in what we are doing. At the same time, I feel very, very hopeful and about our work really continuing to get grounded, because we don't go and try to convince the mayor or other leaders to do a conflict resolution process. We just go in there and ask, like, what are the struggles you're having? What is difficult in how you're strategically maneuvering this project, and then using the principles, like dispute systems design is one of our projects, using the design principles, helping people just rethink, re-articulate their challenges, their conflicts, really helps to create a kind of spaciousness in the mind, to just then, okay, so if I didn't have to think about it as 1, 2, 3, I could think about it as like A, B, C, 2, 3, 5, 6, like there are different ways to imagine the same problem in a nonlinear way. Then people that really, so meeting people where they're at is what I'm saying in a very complicated way. Meeting people where they're at, responding to the needs of the moment. Those are the things that really, for us, has allowed us to create pockets of openness where leaders are listening to us, and then we continue to get rooted. In the RJ and restorative justice and transformative justice spaces, there is in the transformative justice world, there is an insistence on really thinking critically about not working with institutions. And I think that is another very radical and liberating reality, actually. If you look back on any of our ancestries and you think about our practice, a lot of us are immigrants here. Like, if you look back on how communities stayed together, protected each other during times of difficulty, waves of difficulty, it said people would have, in Asian American communities, there's like a kitty, there's like a kitty fund.
The susu.
Yeah,
It's also West African.
Yeah,
Men
and
culture.
India too. Like, when a community has a problem, what did you say? Mexican communities too. So these are like very it's in our bones in a way to live together and work together well and support each other. And in a way, these practices and this design, this brilliant way that design has been implemented really speaks to that. Like going back and looking at what works for us. What are the needs that we have? How are we impacted by each other? How do we focus on the needs we have and support each other? It's really like, I think, at the heart of what all of this work is and what we all long for, I think.
That to that messaging kind of question, and I guess the purpose of today's talk, which is in the context of an exhibition where a prototype is being presented, and I thought you spoke very eloquently about how an exhibition can also be an active tool of advocacy, and how you take advantage of that space to actually bring people, decision makers, into that space and build bridges, connect to the ideas in tangible, concrete ways. And I was wondering, maybe you could expand a bit on that. You were very precise about your three verticals and the way your practice kind of is organized. And I was wondering if, like, exhibition making and institutions and museums can or do or play a role already in how you think through sharing the work and the ideas behind the work to audiences.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, before I started all of this, I actually was doing gallery installation work with nonprofits to bring voices of underserved folks into those spaces. I was working with youth poets, and I was showing films of the day in the life of people around the world. Like, it was kind of a early exploration into doing work this way. I think, the cultural institution can be problematic, right? We've just had some pretty big meltdowns in San Francisco around Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, which is a cultural institution I had been working with, and about politics about all of this stuff happening. So in a lot of the communities I'm working in, they don't go to those museums. They don't live anywhere near them. They're not ever going in there. So I think there's an opportunity here, right? And an institution like the Smithsonian is well poised to be that. And as a little girl, I went to the Smithsonian. Since I was little, I grew up near Washington, D.C. It was free, and my parents didn't have a lot of money, so we would go to Smithsonian. That's the first thing. It was free, right? As soon as you start charging for it, no one can go. And then how do you get people there? My parents, we were still coming from some privilege, right? The folks my mother was teaching in Southeast DC that had no shoes were not going to the Smithsonian. It was just, there's a big discrepancy there. So I think that's a great question. I think there are people thinking about it. I'd love to think more about it. This is the first time we have used it as an organ, designing justice, designing spaces. Is it like, how do we work with this institution to push this agenda and elevate this issue so that folks who have privilege and power can see it and bring it out? But then also, how do you bring a lot more people into the culture? What would you need to do there to make that happen? And why? Part of it is like, I don't think you can make people come to you all the time. You have to go to them in general, right? Because culture is happening everywhere all the time. Some of the best stuff isn't happening in the museum, So what does that flipping that relationship look like? And I think there are people doing that, and I'm not an expert. I'm sure many people here are like, well, there's this person, that person. So that would be great to know more about. But this is the first time we've saw an opportunity to be like, wow, thank you for inviting us into this exhibit. How can we advance this issue that people need to know about? And I'll let you know how it goes. I mean, we have till the summer. So if a pilot comes out of this, that'll be a powerful thing to have done, right? And you get 2 free units for the price of 6. I'm bad with math.
Yeah, I was thinking about all of the different community spaces, cultural institutions, small ones, immigrant, small groups peppered throughout Manhattan, Brooklyn, Bronx, like, East Asian, West African, like just so many small groups, whether it's around arts or domestic violence support or just immigrants helping each other through small organizations. All of these spaces, and what I want to say about it is that right now, given our political climate, there is there is a real palpable fear, and people are gathering together, but then we're gathering in smaller groups, and there is a separation of the groups, like people are protecting themselves. We're all protecting ourselves. And so what that looks like is sometimes gathering in groups, but in separation. And that on some level, I always think about, like, how can a city innovate where in a way that allows for people to have those affinity group spaces, protect them, while also inviting us into the larger public forum. New York City has been a really great example, I think, over the decades of that. A lot of foundations. I remember, I think about 10 years ago, there was I can't remember the name of the foundation that just invited people to come together in large public spaces to talk about what policies they want prioritized. And it was a foundation-led event. 5-6 years ago, our center partnered with the Restorative Justice Initiative, and we created these citywide roundtables, just inviting people in a big room to sit together in small circles and have people just talk to each other. And so, the thirst for it is there, because each of those city roundtables, free events, were full. 200 to 300 people just sort of show up and want to sit in circle and have conversation. So again, like, if you were to I think if you were to zoom out and look at all of this activity, whether it's in small groups or large groups, like, to me, I keep talking about longing, like this, it's all very apparent to me. This longing to connect,
I don't know if we have time to open up for questions. Does anyone have any questions? Maybe I can collect some.
Thanks a lot. It's been very interesting. I went to architectural school in the 60s, and I got to learn about environmental architecture versus decorative architecture. And I'm wondering whether you're familiar with the author Edward T. Hall. And two of the books that we were asked to read was The Silent Language and the Hidden Dimensions. And in a city like New York, which is so diverse, it was an eye-opener in terms of you can design something, but the cultural upbringing of all these clashes. So he explained very succinctly how different cultures perceive space differently. So I'm wondering whether you're familiar with his work or use his work in your studies. Thank you.
I am familiar with his work, and I think I have one of his books on my bookshelf that I haven't read with all the other 100 books, but yes, I have. And I think it's a good point, and I think that is one of the reasons we practice this way, right? That the community engagement process is mandatory in our work. We were just working on to get a project in San Diego that was for asylees and refugees, right? There's a whole infrastructure to deal with immigration. And we brought in an architect, a Palestinian architect on our team as well, because she also understands the spatial context within which people are living, because space is culture, architecture is culture. And if I'm going into an environment that is not of my culture that I'm familiar with, either I will team up and partner, but either way, there's a whole lot of listening and working and learning and understanding in a very graphic, hands-on way, so that the thing that we create is responsive to the people that we're working with. And also, you could be working in one demographic, like I'm working with a lot of African-American folks and Latinx folks. They're not the same. They're not always not the same thing, right? It depends. Everybody's context is unique, and you have to always approach it with beginner's mind. You always approach it with that attitude, or else, we love to do the cookie cutter thing, partly because of the cost of the thing, right? I mean, part of the challenge we have is how do we pay to practice that way, right? We got money from the burn to be able to do the level of engagement work that we did do, right? That was a grant. I haven't read the first one or the second one, actually. I'm just trying to think. I think they're both on my bookshelf, though. Which would you say I should read first? Okay, I'll do Hidden Dimension. Yeah, I do have that one. I do have that one. Okay, I'll read Hidden Dimension first.
You have books on your bookshelf that you haven't read? How dare you? No.
We got vast amounts.
Me too.
Is there an audio book, man?
So I have a question about the kind of proposal putting, like, is New York City the country's first restorative justice city? Which I misunderstanding, but there is still some sort of relation to the actual justice system and how it works, like cases get funneled into restorative space. So, which is, I guess, inevitable. But as you seek to make restorative justice a part of the system, which is super exciting, how do you sort of battle the systemic oppression or racism that's already kind of embedded into the system itself? So how do you make sure that the cases that are afforded the privilege of kind of being funneled into the restorative justice system are doing so through sort of like an equal way, that it's not something that's afforded to specific people with certain privilege, you know, because of the discrimination in the justice system. So perhaps it's a bit of a pessimistic and cynic view of the justice system, but as it becomes part of the system, how do you make sure that it's still doing what you want it to do and it's accessible to the people that you want it to do?
So the two major projects that I was involved in helping to create, first the Red Hook peacemaking program, which is stationed at the Red Hook Community Justice Center, which was built by the Center for Justice Innovation in the 90s. And the Syracuse Near West Side Peacemaking Project, which we both talked about. So we asked all of these questions. I can tell you, I'll try to be very brief, but I can tell you how we did it in Red Hook. So one of the things you'll notice is in both of these projects, we chose not to build the restorative justice program in the main downtown courthouse, right? We chose to build it in a community where we felt like it was both needed and would be received. Second thing is we went through a long planning process with both of those projects, years long, to work with the community to ask them, A, is this something you want? B, if you do want it, what should it look like in order to respect the needs of this community, and blah, blah, blah. The locations themselves were picked with a lot of input about what's safe ground. If there are rival factions within the community, you don't want it in one. See, the location matters, the design of the space, the material, everything. But then you also want to make sure that you are training local community members, at least in the programs that I've been involved in. The facilitators of these circles were not professionals. They were community members who were trained by professionals, but they're volunteers. And it was really heartening for me to see dozens and dozens and dozens of community members who were willing to volunteer huge amounts of their time to go through the training and then to stay involved in the program over years and facilitate these cases. And anyway, to answer your question though, when the cases come into the system, the way we did it in Red Hook was we asked the prosecutor and the defense attorney and the judge, we want you to be on the lookout for any case that involves participants who are going to have an ongoing relationship. Okay. So one of the first cases that we took, and we made a video about it, it's beautiful, was about two neighbors who lived across the hall from each other in a public housing complex in Red Hook. And they had gotten into a physical fight after years and years of escalating arguments. And the police came and there was an assault charge and it became a court case. So that's a perfect example, right? Those two people are going to continue to have a relationship even after this court case is done. Same thing would be true about, a dispute that happens between students in a school, or, anything where the people are going to be, there's a relationship that needs to be tended to. And so we offered the program to anyone where we thought there was going to be an ongoing relationship. Those people were kind of brought over to the restorative justice office. They meet with the staff who explains to them the process. And as Setu mentioned, it's all 100% voluntary. So no one's ever coerced into doing the process. But it's offered to everyone who has that sort of ongoing relationship in their case, and people are free to either take it or leave it. Both sides have to agree to do it. So that's kind of the fairest, most equitable way we could think of, is just offer it to everyone who fits that description.
Setu, weren't you one of those people?
Yeah, I was one of the trained peacemakers through the Red Hook program, and I volunteered for a couple of years. And I remember doing a case with a sister who called the cops on her little brother who broke her window in her apartment because he was angry about something, and she, they had ongoing difficulty in their family, like all the things that Deanna talked about, like income, in just inequity, like through generations, and struggling to have a home together. And so I remember that this young person, I think he was 14 when he came into the peacemaking process, and it was all the people, whoever was in the room in the peacemaking circle were people who lived in Red Hook, and they did not speak to him or his sister like they were criminals or people in a courtroom, So I think the Red Hook program is pretty innovative because it does this level setting, because it's actually sits in the neighborhood. The peacemakers are from the neighborhood in which the people who are, going to, they all live in the same neighborhood. And on some level, there's this, on the peacemaking program also does a lot of community development activities. Like they've, in the past, taken young people to museums in DC. I remember being part of that. So community development is part of the program. And in that way, getting to your question, like there isn't this otherizing. It's not like this clinical other process. It's like embedded in the network of the community in the Red Hook initiative.
That's why I love that. I love it. That's why I love the thing. And I also know that project was one of my first inspirations to do this work. And I went out to see it. I got a little mini grant to come look at it. And they had these little, at the front, they had these little design guidelines. It was instantly validating that they were thinking about the environment, right? The judge doesn't sit on the dais. They're like at level and all of this stuff. So it was so inspiring for me.
And just real quickly to echo something I said in an earlier remark, when you ask prosecutors and defense attorneys and others who work in the system, what are the cases that you hate the most? The cases that are really, really hard to deal with. And they're those cases. They're the cases where the people have an ongoing relationship with each other. There's a lot of emotions involved. These systems are inundated with cases. They have way more cases than they can handle. And so cases like this that require a lot of conversation and a lot of dealing with people's emotions, like they tend to kind of get the short end of the stick because people are like, I don't have the time for this. So if you go to them and you say, we will gladly take your hardest cases, the ones that you really don't want to deal with, they jump at it.
Also add that I know for a fact that there's some stuff that goes on the DL as well, right? Grassroots, we don't even call nobody, right? It's happening, right? So there's stuff happening way outside the system that I know is like in some cases, in severe cases too, domestic violence cases, like a lot of different stuff where people are doing this work.
Yeah, can I give an example?
Yeah. I find that, because we like to work for those folks too.
Yeah. I'm part of a group called Hidden Water. We use restorative circles to heal the impact of child sexual abuse harm on the family system. So in this organization, we use circles to bring together people who've caused harm to young people, sexually harmed young people who were harmed as young people, and family members who are part of the family system. Like I have been harmed as a young person, and so my cousins, my brothers, my other family members, while they may not be direct harm causers, are part of a system of harm. And so what Hidden Water does is really speak to the system of harm by helping each person in the system really fend with their own healing and growing from that time of harm, So this is something, at Hidden Water, we don't really take any cases that come from no directives from any court systems or any institutions. If people do come through an institution, we make sure that each person wants to participate. And we insist that the institutions aren't really holding them to participating in these circles, that they're voluntarily participating. And then our circles are very intensive, 12 weeks of sitting with other people who share, like as a person who's, for example, we have a circle, a purple circle, for people who've caused sexual harm to young people. Those people are sitting with others who've caused sexual harm. The facilitator in that circle is a person who's caused sexual harm. So there is this kind of healing environment that's created that is otherwise impossible to find, especially connected to the court systems, where a person who can cause sexual harm to a child can sit with other people who have the shared same experience and really start to talk about accountability, remorse, what they've been doing, minimizing, denying, blaming in their whole lives, and they're like beginning that healing process. And so we have circles like this for different parts of a family system. So the idea is, if you work with each part of a system, you can start to really touch the ground of shifting generational harm. So that's an example.
Oh, I do, honey. I do. I do. I've been in lots and lots of them.
What's great about it, this deal about down right here. The fact that the business of the one like county jail, that is definitely more than that.
I appreciate you bringing that, because I think we're seeing it. They are closing, right? It's going in that direction. I have active projects now about closing Men's Central Jail in LA. The prison repurposing commission I was on was about those RFPs are coming out now. If you see them, there's one out now. Massachusetts closing, they're closing, right? We're at that tipping point. I think one of the challenges we have on both fronts, right, is what does it do to the justice core, right? Just have a jail come down. And then what does it do to a town where the prison was the primary way of driving the economics, right? Which is why I loved being on that commission. That is the most brilliant thing I have seen, to get all the folks in the room who can talk about what it really means to close and repurpose a prison site. I have not seen many people do it successfully. I go all over the country looking for it. So I'm obsessed with it. I've come up with concepts of what we could do. We can make welding schools, whatever, right? All the things. But at the end of the day, I think New York State's poised to begin to do some of that. The stuff is coming down. It needs to be repurposed, and it needs to be done at every level to think about it economically. And this is where I think this kind of room, right? This kind of brain trust, starting to think about this would be very exciting. So I'm happy that one came down. They're all coming down eventually. It just doesn't work. if it worked, I would say go for it. But it doesn't work. And I think these solutions we're talking about here are we're going to need a lot of solutions. There's no one solution to this problem. There's like a million of them. This is where it starts in one thing, but there are a lot of other things. So thanks for reminding us and elevating the what do we do now? What do we do with those spaces, places?
Oh. Uh, Thank you so much for sharing. Two questions. The first one is, I feel like it's really amazing how you had the system of not you designing, but people who had experience designing and actually building. It's amazing. I was also thinking that it's kind of similar to what I saw in like disaster response. Like Shigeru Ban has done some of the inside of space. Do you feel like you could do this for disaster response? And do you want to do it internationally? Maybe that's my point.
We know disaster relief stuff is a whole other set of things. And I have many friends that do that. Eric Cecil, master of disaster himself is what he's called. He's an architect. He focuses on that. It's that sort of international geopolitical, I mean, that is just beyond what I feel I'm even beginning to able to think about. But what I will say is I'm constantly and have been in international dialogue around the incarceration space with countries all over the world, including Colombia, um, El Salvador. I've had dignitaries, government people come visit us. I've gone there to visit them. We're in constant conversation. We look globally at restorative justice practices, transformative justice practices, and how people are addressing this. There are people who are doing way more exciting things than we are, right? We are not number one in any of it. And I think that when you start to do this system change work, we cannot only look in our own country, we have to look all over the world and find out who's doing what. So when I can, I run around and see what other people are doing. It is very inspiring, right? In Colombia, they have restorative justice for youth in cases of very severe violence. They have spaces for that. It's working, right? It was really phenomenal to see it. And they're not the only ones. So yes, no, I'm not doing disaster recovery, but I am, I'm down for the global brain trust.
I think we have to end it there, but maybe a round of applause for everybody.